To the meeting, we have already formed a quorum, so let's invite the officials and also the deputations to join us. Good, you raise your hand so early.
你問啊冇係，我會嘅，我會嘅，我一定會嘅，我一定會，我會代表委員會致歉。
I will be apologizing on behalf of the panel. Rest assured, I'll do that.
我唔會制止你咁做嘅。
I'm not going to forbid you from doing that.
一次過。好啊，好，楊雪盈。好啊，好好好。你好，係。
Good afternoon.
Welcome, deputations. On behalf of the panel, I wish to apologize to the deputations and individuals because we could not make it within the statutory time and the meeting was aborted. Our sincere apologies. Without further ado, let's get started as soon as possible. May I remind members that we have got 36 deputations, and I'll invite you to speak according to the order of registration. And may I remind members that since we have quite a lot of deputations, so each will have up to 3 minutes to speak. And after that, I will give the floor to the administration to respond and for members to ask questions. For deputations who are not present today, you are welcome to give a submission to the Secretariat afterwards. Feel free to use our earpiece for channel 1. As channel 0, channel 1 is, the floor is 0, channel 1 Cantonese, channel 2 English, and channel 3 Putonghua, and please wear the microphone as well. Your speeches are not protected by the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance. And the same applies to your written submissions, so you are liable for your own speech. And may I remind members of the public in the public gallery that we have a note for members of the public attending meetings of the council in the public gallery. Please refer to that. The first speaker is Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. Chairman, there is no need for you to apologize on behalf of the council because you were 2 members short for quorum. If myself and Lau Siu Lai were not disqualified, you would have formed a quorum because Ms. Lau is responsible for bazaar policy and myself very interested in hawker affairs. So a reply from the administration said that hawker policies should not be regarded as a policy to help the disadvantaged or to alleviate poverty. Now, this is entirely wrong. You ask people to be self-reliant, and if they don't get a job, they will be fined for $2. And what's $200? What's wrong if they can make a living by frying noodles? There are 19 districts in Hong Kong, and there are so many sites on short-term tenancies or with users pending. Why can't they be used? The food truck was a proposal by John Zhang, and it has failed. Now you have failed, and we have a fine tradition of hawkers in Hong Kong selling food, clothing, and commodities. They want to be self-reliant by being hawkers, but they are not allowed to do so. And you just have to take a look at Carrie Lam. She said that she changed her policy 4 times within a week, and now that $200 of penalty will be waived. We used to have the Municipal Services Council, and then in 1999, all members were directly related or indirectly elected from district councils, and now the 2 Municipal Services Council are disbanded, and you have delegated functions to LCSC and FEHD. Now no one is in charge of hawker policies. There is no councillors returned by direct elections to take care of this policy. The 2 councils used to be financially autonomous. Now, because you abolished the 2 Municipal Services Councils, you deprived of the public the right to elect their representatives. So who will manage the LCSD and FEHD? They supported abolition of the 2 councils. They should be punished for that. Well, the 2 councils was abolished in 1999, 19 years ago. These officials are out of control. In the past, they were not allowed to speak up in Municipal Services Council meetings. Please don't believe that legislators have created trouble in Hong Kong. In fact, the DAB members protected their interest. Thank you. Mr. Chan Kam Wing. Thank you, Chairman. The FGHD would like to address all the issues that are long-standing in one go. First, the hawker selling fabric. They have contributed a lot to promoting the economy of Hong Kong. Now they are affected by e-commerce. A responsible government should try how to help them. They should not be driven into bazaars or markets where food and or clothing are sold. 20 years back, we didn't imagine that recyclers could receive subsidy from the government in buying or selling junk. Now, we should think of giving a subsidy to these hawkers. Now, people can sell phone cards and licensed itinerant hawkers. There is an established way for them to be allocated fixed pitches. There can be balloting every quarterly or every half yearly, and then this is an established practice. They don't have to have a separate queue. And for the registered assistants, they are most capable and experienced and qualified to operate vacant hawker pitches, because these are hundreds or so vacant pitches are now here because their employers have retired, and these assistants have helped them for a long time. In fact, hawkers are not as profitable as it was in the past. They can't make as much as people doing dishes, so on and so forth. 4. Members of the public. Well, a number of the deputations will comment on that and will not speak on that. And that 5-year plan. Now, if you join a trade, or if you join the civil service, or you are allocated a PRH unit, and the term is only for 5 years, what will happen after 5 years' time? This is so unsettling. Now, if you want renewal or turnover of hawkers, then you can make it 10 or 12 or 15 years. A 5-year term will cause a batch of unemployees every 5 years. This is not something the government would like to see. I hope officials and legislators can think for the hawker trade. This is such a humble trade. We want you to give us support and assistance. Thank you. The Association of Kowloon and Hong Kong Traders. Thank you. For the 4 categories. Now, for licensed newspaper hawkers, they are mainly in busy spots of the urban areas. If they are allocated vacant stores in the 43 bazaars, I don't think they like it. And for licensed itinerant hawkers, there is already a system for them to operate in fixed pitches. It's just that they are not interested. So I think you should already give them grant. And as for assistant registers with 5 years or more experience, for a long time they've asked for priority in the balloting exercise. There will be 423 vacant pitches for allocation. However, there were 105 allocated to them for 2,186 registered assistants. This is very unfair. Members of the general public satisfying some basic criteria, well, this is not reasonable, because for PRH waiting queue, you have queue and you have a scoring scheme, and I suggest that we shorten or we narrow down this category to 12% of the total of hawkers. We have no objection to giving these pitches to licensed newspaper hawkers and licensed itinerant hawkers, but they should be mainly for their assistance. And the vacant pitches should be given open to registered assistants for balloting. And we're against the 5-year operation requirement, because 5 years afterwards we will have unemployed hawkers. Thank you. Mr. Lau Kai-ming from Jardine Bazaar Crescent. Thank you. It is proposed that the vacant pitches be allocated to licensed newspaper hawkers, licensed itinerant hawkers, registered assistants with 5 years or more experience, and members of the general public satisfying some basic criteria. And then the registered assistants are only regarded as employees of the licensees, and giving them some priority is already a discretionary arrangement. We cannot agree to this argument. Hawkers are welcomed by the community, and they have local characteristics. Registered assistants can help the licensees, the experienced, and in doing business, and they can help to make our streets more vibrant, and their contribution to the industry should not be disregarded. FGHD is of the view that the allocation of vacants must be fair and impartial. There are 5,000 odd hawkers and also over 1,000 itinerant hawkers in Hong Kong. And itinerant hawkers stand a 12 times higher chance than that of registered assistants. There is no harm in taking care of others. However, 80% of the vacant hawkers stores should be allocated to registered assistants with 5 years or more experience for balloting. And we do not like this 5-year term.
Hawking is just a very basic trade, and hawkers are only able to make ends meet, and therefore the administration should not be too harsh on them. Next, concern group on Cross Street and also Tai Yuen Street fixed pitch hawkers. Chairman, in June 2013, the administration rolled out the hawker assistance, the 5-year hawker assistance scheme, and as a result of that, 854 licenses were recovered, and adjustments would be made so that 423 vacant licenses would be reissued to 4 types of persons. On the 11th of December 2018, at the panel meeting, the FEHD representatives made it clear that they could not promise that they would be able to identify places in order to make up for the 400 plus licenses that would be scrapped as a result of this exercise. We'd like to express our very strong satisfaction, because this is like drying up the entire hawker industry, and as a result, the industry might be dying. The administration should reallocate the vacant hawker licenses to the licensed newspaper vendors, and also licensed itinerant hawkers, and those registered assistants with 5-year or more experience, because they are raw eligible persons. At present, there are 5,107 registered assistants, and many of them have more than 10 years experience assisting the licensees in running fixed pitch business, and they're very familiar with the operation, and therefore the present practice should be that they should have priority in getting the licenses. The administration has been talking about revitalizing the bazaar business, and for these experienced hawker assistants, they should be able to re-enliven the bazaars, and we hope that some 70% of the vacant stores can be made available to those registered assistants with 5 years or more experience, so that they'd be able to draw lots amongst themselves. We are strongly against the new hawker license policy under the FEHD, which would only allow for 5 to 10 years operation period. Hawkers are very welcome by the local community, and they help the local community resolve many livelihood issues, and many of them have already been running, and the 5th year will be coming very soon, and the administration is going to recover their licenses. So for those who have been registered as assistants, they'd be at a loss, and they would feel very helpless, and that would only make them lose their jobs again, and therefore we are strongly against it. Thank you. Next, Pukwa Street Hawker Association, Madam Chen Mei Xun. Good afternoon, Chairman and members. According to our statistics, well, for those registered assistants with 5 years or more experience, there are some 5,000 plus of them, and only 500 licenses would be available for them to draw lots. So about 1 in 30 will be able to get a license or get such a store. Well, originally, both members of the public and also the registered assistants would be eligible, but then with the given the fact that both itinerant hawkers and also newspaper vendors would also be eligible to join the lot drawing or balloting exercise, so there will be even slimmer chance for us to get a license. And we have also consulted these assistants, and they believe that this is grossly unfair to those of us who have been working as registered assistants. And therefore, the administration should make reference to the earlier practice of the ex gratia payment of $120,000 in surrendering the hawker license, so that, well, for those hawkers who are willing to surrender the licenses, their licenses should be recovered by the administration, because in fact many of them simply do not want the license anyway, because many of them have been selling newspapers, and if they have to go into these market stores, they might not like it at all, and many of them are already quite old in age. And we have also asked them about their views, and they do have the intention to surrender the licenses if they can be given this ex gratia allowance. And also, for those who are newly licensed, their license validity will only be for 5 years, and after 5 years they will have to join the balloting exercise again. So after going into a new environment, they would also need time to adapt to the new environment. It might take 1 or 2 years before their business will run in, and therefore if their license will have to be surrendered in 5 years, that's not fair. We are against it. Next, Ms. Chang Shou-Wo. I'm the chair of the Tung Choi Street Hawker Association. I have 5 points to make. First, I'm in support of all the vacant stores to be allocated as soon as possible. The reason being that government land is very precious and expensive. It should not be left vacant and wasted. And for these vacant stores, if they are left vacant for a long time, that would also affect the operating environment of the district, and that would also entice the adjacent stores to illegally occupy those space. That would also be unfair. And there should also be equal balloting, so that the balloting should be fair. And for register assistants, if they are like any member of the public in joining the balloting, that's not fair. They should be classified into one group, and we should also give them additional score given their experience. And therefore, we suggest that for those who have 5 years or more experience, they should be grouped together as working under or for the same store. For itinerant hawkers and also newspaper vendors, there is a need for us to take care of them, because after all, they are working in a dying industry, and therefore they should be given more choices so that they could switch to other businesses. I think it's good. And there are also views saying that there should be more hawker stores. In fact, I do not agree with that, because we have already got 43 areas with very closely aligned hawker pictures, and they have already gone through a lot of ups and downs over the years, and they have a historical meaning to these communities. So I'm not suggesting that for other areas to run such stores, it will not be easy. But then we will have to make sure that the location would be right, and we would also have to ensure that there will not be any environmental nuisance, and also the community would be prepared to accept it, and therefore it's not an easy task. And there are some views saying that the number of vacant stores should be equal to the number of hawkers benefiting from the hawker assistance scheme. I do not agree, because they do not understand the current arrangement. They do not know that other than promoting this assistance scheme, there is no intention whatsoever to reduce the number of stores. In fact, there is a need for us to improve the business environment of these cooked food stores. For example, in the 4th section of the Women's Street, there are too many stores, and it's very hard to get into that. And therefore, the administration should be listening to the views of the hawkers, and they should also work with the association and also the hawkers, so that they can make good use of the space. And as a result of those discussions, we now have a better arrangement for Section 4, and the layout would be a lot more spacious, and it's a win-win situation. I believe that for other hawker areas, there would be similar situations. Next, Mr. Wu Kem Hong, chairman of the Hong Kong and Kowloon Licensed Hawkers Association. Well, most of our members are registered hawkers, Chairman. I'm the youngest. I'm already age 72. Under the new scheme of the administration, I think they are actually going to phase out hawkers altogether, instead of having a tolerant policy and trying to relocate them. In fact, under the previous legislation, there would be inheritance, there would be succession. But then under the new system, there is no inheritance whatsoever. And if you look at what the earlier speakers have said, in fact, that would only be valid for 5 years. So are we going to have hawkers 5 years down the road? Well, the current situation is that the inheritance would be for 1 generation only. All right, if I retire and then after 40 years, there will be no on-street hawker or hawkers at all, because there would be no stores, because if there is no inheritance, then definitely they'll be phased out. And to be more objective in looking into this, well, for those licenses that have surrendered, actually most of them have surrendered their license because of their old age. And then for the younger generation, they do not want to take over. That's the reason why they have surrendered their licenses. Even for my children, well, they are not going to take over from me. So I'd be prepared to work until I die. But then even though I'm a licensed hawker, the location where we hawk is flexible. The problem is about self-discipline and also management. To what extent are we causing obstruction to the street? So management is important, but then for self-discipline, it's hard to do that. Even for animals, it's harder to expect them to exercise self-discipline. Everybody would like to make the best out of what they get, and therefore they'll try to run a good business. And therefore, if you want to continue with this culture of having on street hawkers and hawking activities, you should consider improving the system. Instead of having a validity period of 5 years, you should allow for a longer period. And also for inheritance, yes, there might be concessionary arrangements for them. But then what if the younger generation simply do not want to take over? Okay, there should be a scoring system for those who have breached the regulations more. They should be denied of renewal. But then you should not just cancel them across the board. So it's about the administration's intention. Do you really wish to retain this business? And if you're interested, then we should be spending more time. I still vividly recall that back in 1993, some of our traders said that, they used to say that the administration is just trying to offer concession to the developers so that they find it easier to run shopping centers and so on. I think their remarks are right, because for those hawker areas, most of them are very old communities. Thank you. Next, Mr. Chen Kin Wei. Yes, I'm Chen Kin Wei. I'm a representative of the hawkers at Maple Road, and I'm also a licensed fixed hawker operator, and therefore I have no interest whatsoever in this scheme. These are my views. The administration used 5 years to enhance the hawker license scheme, and upon the completion of that, some 400 plus hawker license would be put out for balloting. I think so long as you can meet one of the following requirements, you should be eligible. Number one, you are a Hong Kong citizen aged above 18. Second, you have never got the express share allowance under the previous hawker surrender system. And third, you do not have a fixed pitch hawker license. And fourth, for those newspaper vendors and also itinerant hawker licensees, so long as they are prepared to surrender their existing license, they should be eligible. Second, should we be issuing more hawker licenses? I personally am against it, because if you look at the current licenses, only those that have more people flow and also those who are more popular, people would be bidding for that. And for those that are less popular, nobody would be interested. In fact, in some of the hawker areas, there are many stores that have been left vacant. In fact, if we issue more licenses, it's not going to help. In fact, if we just issue licenses for the sake of issuing licenses, then priority should be given to the 400 plus licenses and also the vacant stores that have been left vacant for a while. In fact, the operating environment for hawkers is already very difficult. I believe that 5 years is a bit too short for running a business, and therefore that should be for at least 10 years. I personally think that it should be aligned with the existing hawker license policy. There should not be any restriction on inheritance. These are my views.
Thank you, Mr. Chen Man-fu. Thank you. I'm Chen Man-fu. I am a fixed pitch hawker and also representative of the HMCC of Pillow Street. I agree that vacant pitches should be reallocated to the following 4 categories of persons. First, itinerant hawkers, because Hong Kong's pavements are very narrow and traffic is busy, and when it is dangerous for them to push their carts when they start operating every day. And I think they should be allocated a fixed pitch so that they can operate in a safe and easily managed environment, and they can also transform their business. Second, licensed newspaper hawkers. Lifestyle has changed. It's difficult for news vendors to operate. In fact, this is a sunset industry. If they would like to transform their business, we should allocate them fixed pitches. Third, assistance. The licensees may be rather old, or they may want to surrender their licenses, and as a result, the assistants may become unemployed. However, the assistants have contributed to the industry. We should give them an opportunity and let them have fixed pitches. However, there must only registered licensees with a certain period of experience should be given a priority in allocation. For new hawkers, the vacant pitches should be open to members of the public for application because the scale of business and costs are relatively lower, and we can attract young people or traders with some characteristics to join the trade so that we can encourage positive development of the trade. However, a successful applicant must continue with the business they apply for, and they cannot change their trade, and there should not be a limit to their to the license validity period, because this will dampen the wish of new hawkers to join the industry, and this is not conducive to the development of the industry. So I'm of the view that the vacant pitches should be allocated to the 4 categories in a balanced manner. We should not be lopsided. By means of balloting, we can accord them priority to choose the stores. Thank you. I'm Wang Xiu Keung. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm a representative of an HMCC of Manwha Lane. I'm also a fixed pitch hawker. The following is my view on the proposals. I support that all vacant pitches be reallocated ASAP. As regards the categories of eligible persons and how, I'm of the view that in reallocating the vacant pitches, some of them should be allocated to members of the public, young people in particular, because the government has done a lot to help the younger generation. People who are aged between 18 and 35 can be allocated to encourage them to start the business. It's just like young people bidding for a store at our New Year market fair, flower market. With young people joining the trade, we can bring innovation to the hawking business so that hawker trade can perpetuate. The scale of operation and costs are relatively smaller than operating a shop, so we can help people with limited means to join the trade, and we can also allow licensed newspaper hawkers, itinerant hawkers, and experienced assistants to apply for the vacant pitches. Newspaper hawkers and itinerant hawkers can change their trades by joining the bazaar areas. Registered assistants have contributed a lot to the industry, and therefore they should be given some priority. And the 4 categories can decide on the priority by joining a ballot. As for registered assistants, they should at least have 5 to 10 years of experience before they can be given a priority. And as for the validity period, there should not be any limit. For instance, a new hawker might start to make some profit in his business after a few years. And if the license has to be surrendered, then this will be a disincentive for people to join the trade. We should ensure a level playing field for all, and then we should announce the rules and regulations, and all who are interested can join. That is a proper use of public resource. Thank you. Mr. Liu Se-chan, Alliance of Newspaper Hawkers in Hong Kong. Thank you. Newspaper hawkers have more than a century of history in Hong Kong. Now there is hope that we can change our trade. Of course, it is good news because this is already a declining business. At its peak, we had more than 2,000 newspaper hawkers, but now we've only got 100 or so. So we should allow the trade a chance of changing their trade. So whether it be the itinerant hawkers and newspaper hawkers, we welcome the proposals. We are just changing our mode of business to make a living. Now, we don't have to worry. It's not that all newspaper hawkers will switch their trade. I think these hawkers know how to survive, so it is really their choice. We are grateful to the deputations here and the administration for giving us a chance. We will remain self-reliant as far as possible, and we have done a consultation of newspaper hawkers. Some of them want to change their trade, but sometimes there is a problem with the place where they hawk. A vibrant area may no longer be so because of redevelopment, and our license is granted to a fixed place. So even though we are not making any business, we have to stay on at the allocated space. Some might just operate for half a year and then rest for another half in order to maintain the license, and they have to pay thousands of dollars in license fee every year. The administration's proposal has taken care of different aspects, newspaper hawkers as well as itinerant hawkers. We may not all choose to take up a fixed pitch. Not necessarily. Only some with the need will take up fixed pitches. Those that can make a living at their current locations will not choose to do so. And I agree that we should revitalize the hawker trade, and we should attract new blood by attracting young people to join the trade so that we can strengthen our trade. Thank you. Mr. Sin Ho Fai from the Civic Party. Thank you, Chairman. The Civic Party has no objection to the reallocation of vacant fixed pitches. The problem is there are only 423 now to be allocated evenly among 4 categories. According to a survey in 2017, there are 1,400 odd unlicensed hawkers in Hong Kong, but we've only got 423 pitches, so there will only be 100 or so available for members of the public. This is hardly enough. In 2010, there was allocation exercise. Many people applied for a license, and after the survey, 3,600 responded. About 70% indicated their interest in continue to apply for a license, but there are only 400 odd pitches, so this is hardly enough. So shouldn't the government reconsider its hawker policy? In addition to a fixed pitch hawkers, perhaps we should revive the itinerary hawker licensing scheme. Now, and Mrs. Carrie Lam is talking about a youth bazaar at the Kai-Tak development area. As we all know, it's going to be at the tip of the runway, and it is not for young people to join easily. All right, we want community bazaars, and what has the government done so far? We urge the administration to operate a bazaar licensing system so that more young people can join these bazaars, and only one license will do. They don't have to apply for different types of licenses. The government claims that they will keep this traditional trade. But in the paper, the government said that hawkers should not ignore market forces, and they should find a way of a sustainable way of doing business themselves. That means the government is not going to give them any assistance. I think at the end of the day, hawkers will be forced to join all markets operated by Link Reeds and Quinoa. Well, there is a new market outsourced by the Link in Fanling, and hawkers that were operating there were forced to move away because they keep calling the police and even removing their carts. Is it a way to help hawkers to survive? I know we have some really Auntie Tong is here. She is helping to keep a traditional craft, and yet her commodities have been confiscated by the FEHT time and again. Is it a way to protect our invisible heritage? Mr. Zheng Yan, thank you. Only 423 vacant pitches are available for allocation, and this is hardly enough, and this will stifle the room for survival of our hawkers. And among the 423 pitches, close to 200 of them were already vacated even before the hawker assistance scheme. That means we have 617 pitches less before the assistance scheme. So this is a departure from the government's asserted policy in the paper to support the development of the hawker trade. I've approached many members of the public. They would like to join bazaars and hawker areas to make a living. That means whether we talk about fixed pitched license or itinerant licenses, there is a great demand for them. As for setting up bazaars, they're also supported by the majority of the public. Last time it was mentioned at the panel by the assistant director that in NDAs and new towns and new hawker pitches might be set up. But then, according to this paper, the government has no intention to set up new hawker areas. So the government has gone back on its work, and this is regrettable. The government must issue more fixed-pitched as well as itinerant hawker licenses, and there should be new hawker areas in the whole territory. We also asked the administration to set up a timetable for implementation ASAP so that for grassroots that are not easily employable can have a chance to make a living. And it is proposed that the vacant pitches be allocated to 4 categories: newspaper hawkers, itinerant hawkers, assistants, and members of the public. The government has not provided any detailed justifications for these 4 categories, nor has there been any public consultation. The government has not taken care of the needs of the grassroots and the disadvantaged. In the community, we want new hawker areas to be set up in new towns, so they have certainly overlooked the contribution of hawker areas in eliminating poverty. So the whole thing must be a subject of consultation again, and the government should take care of the grassroots and those who are disadvantaged so that they can make a living.
And for the 4 categories of people who would be eligible for application, We suggest that some itinerary hawker licenses should also be recovered and they should also be reissued. Thank you. Next, Mr. Lee Kwok Kun, society moving forward. Well, I've heard many deputations say that, how the 400 plus hawker licenses recovered by the administration should be reallocated. In fact, before we do the reallocation, we should first think about whether or not there is no space or possibility for hawkers to survive. Of course, I understand that it's not that every district would be suitable for developing the hawkers business, and therefore we have to look at the individual districts and their characteristics. If you paid attention to the districts where there used to be hawkers, in fact they can rely on one another, and that would also be their characteristics. For example, some trades of similar nature would be able to rely on one another and thrive when they work together. So in those districts, can we also come up with new space that can be made available for that? Can such new thinking be applied? And also, secondly, has the administration talked to the town planners? In fact, whether or not a particular community is suitable for hawkers to run their business, it depends on the local characteristics and also the local community economy. Apparently, the administration is saying that, all right, they have already done this reallocation, but then not much has been taken into account with regard to the local community's characteristics. They are just saying that, okay, I have these vacant slots, and therefore you can bid for that. In fact, the administration should also consider making use of the same site for different purposes. There are many vacant sites, and some of them can also be put out for use by the public. Indeed, it doesn't mean that they need to operate there full-time and whole day. Well, some would be suitable for long-term hawking. Others would also be for shorter hours. Let's say they might only need the space during a particular time slot. For example, we can see there are dawn markets, and also there are also early morning markets. We can also consider those operation modes. And also for hawkers economy, in fact, that's also a very important social ladder. Well, in the past, that was available. That's why we have many senior citizens here who are willing to share their past mode of operation with us. And I'm also glad to hear from some of them that they're willing to allow the younger generation to take over so that their business would also have a future. And also with regard to the issue of licenses, I believe that the validity period is not the most important thing. After the license has been issued, the most important thing is not to allow for any speculation activities. Well, the administration might be aware that there are some out there who are renting these licenses, or they would just be hiring these licensees as a substitute, so that they would just be standing by the store without running the business. Next, Ms. Fan Pui Ying, a concerned group on revitalizing street cooked food business. Well, we share some of the sentiments of the speakers. In fact, we have too few licenses and we have too many bidders. In fact, the administration is claiming that it's trying to develop the business, but in fact, it is trying to dry up the whole business or whole sector. In fact, many registered assistants will have to bid for the limited number of licenses. In fact, there is a lot of need in the community. Our concerned group, since 2016, has been going to the districts to conduct studies on local hawker economy. So other than issuing licenses and having fixed pitch hawkers, there are different ways to respond to the community's desire for some traditional handicraft business, including hiring some lands department and also LCSD lots so that they can also have short-term bazaars and so on. And we've also gone with some town planners, and they also try to draw boxes on the ground, and then we try to allocate those lots to different hawkers. All right, some of the midnight bazaars have become regularized. So we are talking about our social economy and also some local hawker economy. In fact, in Taiwan and Thailand, they have different modes of developing the hawker economy. And indeed, if you're interested in doing this, you should also go and learn from them. Last year, you also set up a subcommittee on bazaar business. In fact, it's a bottom-up approach, and the administration also claimed that they welcome that there are so many bazaars being set up. In fact, it's only with the help of different departments that we've been able to achieve that. In fact, without such policy, without any policy support, our groups will find it very hard to do this. And therefore, I hope that other than issuing some of these licenses, we should also look at it from the perspective of developing a new form of economy. Next, Ms. Lau Ka-shin. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. What I'd like to say is that the administration has been very slow in its awakening. Going back on history, I don't know if you all recall, well, we talk about the rich second generation and also the poor second generation and so on. So about 30 years ago, the situation was that many of the hawkers used to do their business in the night bazaars and so on. But then as a result of a building collapse, the administration decided some 30 years back that they should rehouse all the on-street hawkers into the government complex. But then because of the location and also because of the poor design, well, as a result of the completion of the Main Street market, there was the building collapsed and some three people died and 11 were seriously injured. And I am from the victim's family because one of the 3 persons who died was my dad. So I was from that victim's family. So it was only after 1997. Well, because of the poor design of the market, hawkers found it difficult to run their business, and also the rentals were high because they had to pay some $3,000, and then they could only make about $1,000 or so a month. And because of inflation, they simply could not make ends meet. So we are a family of 13. So how can we support ourselves with that meager income? And my mom inherited the license, and then she was forced to surrender the license, and therefore we had no alternative but to surrender the license. Yes, the department was responsible for managing the system, and yet they are actually doing a U-turn. Things are actually made worse. So if indeed you're going to reissue those licenses, it should not be confined to the 400 or 800, because if you look at the number of licenses per district, you're actually talking about just a few dozen per district. That cannot be enough. And there should also be different forms of doing their businesses. It's not just about a license. More people should be allowed to apply for the license, and they should have different business models. So for the hawker business and also the bazaar business, they could not be separated because they are intertwined. They are very closely linked. So you have to have the hardware, and then you will have to have the software. So that's all I'd like to say. Thank you. Next, Ms. Zhong Choi Wan. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I've been a hawker for some 20 years. Now I've heard from the administration that they'd like to reissue hawker licenses. I welcome that. As to my handicraft business, all right, I call that balloon blowing, and everybody should put up a smile. I've been doing that for some 20 years. I've applied for a license for some 20 years, and yet I never managed to get a permit from the administration nor an itinerant hawker license. How come the administration is looking down on us like that? So we are doing this business, and I'm bringing laughter and happiness to the visitors. And out of 100 visitors who have been surveyed, 100% of them would say that it's a good thing. All right, this is a dying business, and I've been traveling to all over the world for 40 years, 60 years, and yet I've never seen something like that before. So I've been doing this in a Walker precinct for several years, and during every weekend and public holiday, I'd be staging my performance there, and it's been very popular with the visitors and tourists. On one occasion, well, it was 2014. All right, I was arrested by the FEHD. How come they've been selective in arresting me? Because I never charged them anything, and I didn't charge them $10 for every candy. All right, they claim that, well, I sold that at $10. I've been doing that for 20 years. This is a conventional handicraft, and yet the FEHD claimed that I was charging people $10 per candy. So how come I was targeted? How come I was selected and arrested? All right, I'm aged. So you can see that I'm just doing this. I bring with me a small box, and then I call that, okay, I'm selling candy and I'm bringing laughter to all of you. So just a 3-year-old kid would be able to take pictures. All right, they'd be charging some $25 for taking this picture, and then they could also charge people $60, $80 for taking pictures and so on. So how come we are targeted? And by the time when I appear in court, I pleaded not guilty, and yet I was fined. So I was going to die because I couldn't afford to pay the fine, and then they told me that I could pay by installments. Okay. So I went back to Kowloon City, and then I tried to bring back my old working tool, and the craftsman was no longer there, and nobody would be able to make this again for me. So I'm going to die. Okay, next, Mr. Leung. Yes, I'm from Jardine Bazaar. And with regard to the administration claim that, well, the licenses would be reissued and so on, all right, priority will be given to the assistants. Yes, I'm all for it, so I'm not going to dwell on that. But then there are several points that I'd like to make. Well, as Mr. Wu said, many existing licensees are already quite old, and the department would allow them to have 2 assistants to help them. But then have you ever thought about this? That is, as a concessionary measure or compassionate measure, well, for the aged licensee, if their children are willing to take over, or if there is no one to take over, or if they do not have any children, then they could also transfer the license to their assistants, because their assistants have been helping them for a long time. And in some cases, when these licensees are not willing to hand over or surrender the licenses, that's because they don't want their assistants to lose their jobs. And also on this occasion, the administration's earlier scheme was that some 854 licenses were recovered and some 400 plus will be reissued. So the number has come down. And yes, for Jardine Bazaar, yes, you are trying to realign the stores so that there will be more space in between. All right, in Jardine Bazaar, we also have the Feng Yun Lane. And initially, when you came to persuade us to relocate, we were told that there would be some space there, and I'm sure the department knows it well. But then on this occasion, you have not assigned those spaces to any of us. So I think if the administration can be more proactive, it would be able to identify more spaces. All right, if you are able to identify some 3 or 5 spaces per area, then for the 43 areas together, you'll be able to identify more than 100 such spaces. And the current policy is that you're not going to issue licenses for wet goods. In fact, for many residents, and there is indeed a demand for wet goods.
All right, it's just like our area, there are wet goods licenses, one selling flour, another selling vegetables. The two phones asked me to tell you this. You have marked two vacant pitches next to them. So a normal person will understand that there is a conflict of interest. If one dry goods store is just back to back with wet goods store, then there would be conflicts. So you should consult us first so as not to change our business environment. Thank you. That's all I have to say. From the Liberal Party, Mr. Hong. Thank you. Chairman, the Liberal Party always supported the hawker policy so that there can be healthy development for hawkers, and we can have a diversity of economy, and there will be no monopoly by large shopping malls, because hawkers are trying to work hard to make a living, to be self-reliant. So hawker licenses can benefit the grassroots. So we support issuing new licenses to new operators to operate in the vacant pitches. However, for the reallocation of vacant hawker pitches, we should allocate a high proportion to registered assistants, because they have many years of experience and have knowledge in the trade and can help healthy development of the trade. And as for the validity period of a license, I am of the view that the administration is not taking into account the operating environment of hawkers. Now, hawkers rely on their licenses to survive. Once their licenses are lost, they cannot continue to make a living, and the government hasn't provided any supporting measures. The government encourages newspaper hawkers to change their trade and to operate in hawker areas. That means there will be loss of our collective memory. Newspaper hawkers is a feature of Hong Kong, and it is a tourism attraction. The government should enhance their room for survival so that they can be sustainable. The government should also issue a cooked food, Tai Pai Tong, which is a cooked food stores licenses, and given if they are clean and safe, then they should be allowed to operate. It's just like Singapore, they have cooked food centers to attract tourists. In the long term, the government should promote and the further development of the hawker trade. The government should not allow them to be extinct. Hawkers is not a social problem. The government should do its utmost to help them to operate in a diversified manner so that this traditional culture can continue to develop healthily. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Lee Man Kit. Thank you, Chairman. I'm Lee Man Kit from Yau Chi Mong. I am a community officer. I support reallocating the pitches, but should it be as little as few as 423 vacant pitches? We have discussed with the hawkers in the community. Some of them have been vacant for 2-3 years. In Hong Kong, rent is so high. Most hawkers are low income makers. They do not. If we allow the stores or the pitches to be vacant, then it will be a waste of resources. The reallocation to 4 categories of people is acceptable. Why do I say acceptable? Because assistance should be given a higher portion of the vacant pitches, because most licensees are old, and When they pass away, the licenses will be surrendered, and their registers will then lose their jobs. These assistants have worked for more than 5 years. Perhaps an automatic license renewal should be given to them. Many of the pitches are vacant, but not all pitches are suitable for a new trade. For instance, in a market, there may be 40 pitches already, and 8 are already selling fruits. And if there is a vacant fruit pitch for allocating, then perhaps it should not be used for selling fruits, but other new commodities to rejuvenate the market. And we should allow assistants to choose pitches they like. And as for itinerant hawkers, can we issue more licenses? As said by the lady, we have fewer and fewer traditional handicraft and food. We used to see people selling roast sweet potatoes and chestnut, but we have fewer these stores, and itinerant hawkers have to make a living. We should give them more licenses so that there will be fewer competing for fixed pitch licenses in hawker areas. Some young people would like to be hawkers. Can the government give them some subsidy so that they can join the trade more easily? Lastly, if after the reallocation exercise, if some licensees forfeit their fixed pitches 2 or 3 years down the road, how will they be dealt with? Mr. Wing Kit, I oppose the proposal to allocate 105 pitches for registered assistants only, because there are over 2,986 assistants with experience. That means their chance of getting a pitch will be 1 out of 30, or 28%. This is not fair to registered assistants that have been helping licensees for a long time, and so we should allocate more stores for this category. I'm strongly against allowing members of the public to apply for the vacant pitches, because assistants are usually low educated, and they don't have a lot of skills for making a living. If we allow members of the public with no experience at all to join the ballot, that means we allowing novices to compete with them. And I am against the 5-year validity period of the hawker licenses, because after 5 years, the hawkers will have to leave the trade. Thank you. Ms. Se Shuk Ying from Ableu Street Hawker Association. Thank you, Chairman. I'm from Ableu Street. Ableu Street is one of the famous streets in Hong Kong with local characteristics. I have joined the trade for more than a decade. I am in my 30s. I joined the trade when I was in my 20s. Well, my boss taught me how to do business, and that it took me 4 to 5 years to acquire the skills, because we need to spend 2 to 3 hours to open the pitchers and start our operation. I have children. If you only allow me to operate for 5 years, and then afterwards my license will be taken away, this is a nightmare, and I oppose this. And our street has got a lot of interesting trades. Some sell chains, some sell ceramic items, and they are family businesses. We want to preserve the unique features of our community. And some Sherpo has been featured in tourism leaflets. And if you only allow us to operate for 5 years, then the characteristics cannot be preserved. Thank you. Mr. Tam Yuen Hua from Bowling Street Hawker Association. Thank you. 554 licenses have been surrendered, and 423 will be reallocated. We welcome that. Now, for newspaper hawkers, well, this trade has decades of history in Hong Kong. When the business is not viable and you ask them to operate in fixed pitches, then this is a bit difficult. I think the government should relax on the type of commodities they can sell, and they should remain in their current pitches. And as for itinerant hawkers, we welcome them to join hawker areas. They should be allowed to hawk at fixed locations. As for our assistants, we have over 2,900 assistants with more than 5 years of experience. If we only have 100 or so pitches for them, then their chances are very low. They are the real licensed users in Hong Kong. They should be allowed to use the experience to revitalize our hawker trade. And a validity period of 5 years is not desirable. Many hawkers and their assistants are operating in very difficult environment because they have to make a living to support their families. The hawker trade is not very viable. Some of them are not even earning statutory minimum wage. So I hope the administration to reconsider the 5-year validity period, and they should be given a chance to join the queue in the general public as well, so that they can have 2 chances. So there are over 2,900 assistants. There are only 100 stores for allocation. Their chance is very low. We urge the administration to take care of the needs of the hawker trade. Thank you. Mr. Cheng Tek Leung from Fa Yuen Street Hawker Association. Thank you. The 5-year validity period is very dissatisfying, and I am rather angry about that, because that 5-year term will cause a lot of anxiety among us. The hawker trade is declining, and hawkers, many hawkers have been hawkers since they were young. Hawkers and their assistants are engaged in a very professional industry, and the government may be reverting to its policy in the 1980s, trying to eliminate the hawkers. There was never any validity period in hawker licenses. So will this policy apply to existing hawkers when their licenses are due for renewal? This is very worrying. As regards the 4 categories, the current arrangement is very unfair to assistants.
Many people do not understand that for every hawker license, there are conditions imposed on the trades that you can engage in, on the things that you can sell. In fact, there are different conditions in different licenses. And so it's not as you might think that, all right, I can sell anything I want. I can just sell fish balls and so on. In fact, there are a lot of restrictions being imposed. And therefore, if you just issue a license to any member of the public, is that suitable? Will he be able to just do that trade? Will he be able to fit into that ecology of the street or the community that he has been allocated a space? So in your publicity, you have to do a better job. So a hawker license is not something that you can manipulate with, that you can do whatever you want with. In fact, many people have gone through a lot of hardship and difficulties before they have reached this stage. And they've also made tremendous contributions to our community. By now, many of them are already very old, and they need the help of their assistants. So is it that their assistants would not be able to find another job? Well, in order to help that old hawker, they might have worked for them, and therefore more licenses should be issued to these assistants. Thank you. Next, Mr. Lam Chang-fu, operating director from the News Vendors Association. For newspapers vendors, they are like being abandoned by the administration. So, in fact, we are one of those that have been overlooked by the administration. We are actually one of the disadvantaged groups. So very often it's a family business, so the entire family would be involved in running this business. And now you're telling us that we should switch to another trade, and we've been given 5 years to do so. How can it be feasible? We've been news vendors for our whole life, and now you're asking us to switch to another business. Well, for the hawker assistance scheme, newspaper vendors have been left out. They are not part of it. It doesn't really matter, because over the past 10 years or so, many students have approached me, and they've been asking me, how can you survive? How can you make ends meet? And when are you going to die? So they've been trying to help us. So it's a very good subject. In fact, our newspaper vendors are not very organized. There are just 300, 400 newspapers hawkers. They scatter in different districts and so on. In fact, many of them are no longer selling newspapers, because we used to have a business of several million, and we only now have a few dozen newspapers. I've been talking to the administration, asking them, why are we not allowed to sell more items or different types of goods and so on. Well, every time they would just brush me aside and ask me to leave. And now supposedly they are giving us this new turn of chapter, so they are actually allowing us to switch over to a new business. And yet how come people have the impression that we are obstructing the streets? Is it that the developers don't like us? We only have 300, 400 of us. So are they saying that they can no longer tolerate that? So we are very old people. How can you expect us to switch to a new trade? Well, you talk about social harmony, and yet this would be empty talk. if you're doing this to us. All right, this is an old trade, and when we ask some of the vendors to come over to have a chat, they'd say that I'm too old for that. So even if you afford them with a new chance to switch to a new trade, they simply would not be able to do so. Please help to revitalize their trade. Next, yes, Mr. Yun. Yes, I'm representing the newspapers vendors. I'm grateful to all of you for your concern to the sunset industry of newspapers vendors. In fact, I'm sure you've all seen our contribution to our community. And if you look at the newspaper industry, is still very much the local characteristic. We don't want that to fade out. All right, I'm already the second generation in our family. By the time when my parents passed on the business to me, I was already in my 30s, and I've been in the trade for some 30 years now. In the past, well, we used to have a very thriving business in the 80s and so on. We had some 20 plus newspapers, and then for magazines and so on weekly magazines, we have 20 to 30. But by now, if you look at the newspapers, we only have 11, both Chinese and English, and then for weekly magazines, well, you just have a handful of such magazines, and so nobody would be bothered by that. So today, I just have three demands. First, I hope that the department would relax the rules a bit so that newspaper vendors would be allowed to sell more types of goods, so that I would be able to do a better business, and that would also make our business more viable. Second, for all the newspapers vendors that we are seeing, well, they are mostly in their 60s or 70s or even older. So most of them are no longer doing business on the street, because by the time when we took over from our earlier generation, that's because we did not do good at schools, and therefore we had no alternative but to become newspaper vendors. But now for our second generation, most of them are university graduates. So how can you expect them to be willing to become newspaper vendors? And therefore, for those old newspaper vendors in the 60s, 70s, they are no longer able to do a business because they are old and frail. So every morning, when they get up, they have to get up at around 4-5 o'clock, and then they can only close their business by 5 or 6. So there is no time for them to engage in any leisure activities, and therefore many of them have back pain and so on. Many of them simply no longer want to do the business, but then there is no choice. So for those elderly newspaper vendors, when they surrender their license, we hope that they can be given this ex gratia allowance so that they'd be able to have a good retirement life. And third, for those of us who have been able to get a new license, please do not make it 5 years. Please allow for a longer period. All right, thank you for coming, deputations. We'll now open the floor to officials. We have the Undersecretary, Dr. Choi, and Ms. Wong from the FEHD, also from the FEHD, responsible for hawker assistance scheme. We have Lo Yue, and also from the FEHD, we have Mr. Chen Yu Keng and Ms. Cheng Hoi Ying, who is the Assistant Permanent Secretary. Thank you for coming, deputations. So on the reallocation of empty or vacant hawker stores, I'll just say a few words, and then I'll defer to Ms. Wong, who will supplement. Let me reiterate that for the reallocation of vacant hawker pitches, in fact, back in 2011, after the serious fire, there was a genuine need to improve the fire safety for on-street pitches and so on. As a result of that, we deployed resources to undertake this improvement scheme, and we also conducted a review on the 400 plus pitches. First, we have to look at the safety perspective. So whether or not some of those stores would no longer be suitable. And also, if we were to reallocate them or rehouse them, as they would no longer be able to continue their business at the same location, they will have to go elsewhere. And also, some of the licensees have also decided to surrender their licenses through one of the means available. And as some of the speakers have said, we have taken the opportunity to look at the individual districts in the past. The arrangements were not good and the planning was not good, and therefore for the layout we try to take the opportunity to improve that. That's why the number of pictures would be different after the revamping. And there were also other reasons. For example, as a result of the surrender of hawker licenses, the number of vacant stores, and also for licenses that have been vacated. So we have looked at the 43 hawker areas, and 5 or 6 years after the assistance scheme has ended, we try to comprehensively review it so that for some of the vacant pitches they can be reallocated so that different categories of people can apply. And as I said, for the surrender scheme is on a voluntary basis, and some hawkers or itinerant hawkers and also those who have indicated that they'd like to join the business, so they can also apply for those pitches. So I have to emphasize that this is a voluntary scheme. And as some speakers have said, on the validity period, well, the rationale behind this is that we'd like to include this element of turnover. As to how long would be suitable, well, is still very much to be decided. So it's not cast in stone, so we will be willing to look into that. I'll defer to Ms. Wong. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Undersecretary. Well, I'll respond in several aspects. First, on the number. Well, many deputations have said that 854 have been surrendered and only 400 plus are now taken out for reallocation. So that's 423. So how come the number has come down? And also there are 4 categories of eligible applicants, and deputations have also spoken on the categorization. And third, there are some technical details. First, on the 5-year validity, and second is about the classification, because only dry goods hawkers would be eligible. No wet goods hawkers would be able to apply. And also in the consultation period, whether or not the consultation process has been comprehensive enough. And also on inheritance issue, and well, for itinerant hawkers licenses, they have been recovered, and different options have been given to them, and now these options are no longer available. So let me respond to those one by one. First, after 854 licenses have been surrendered, there are only now 423. Is there any room for increasing the number? In fact, as I explained on earlier occasions, for the 5-year plan, the 5-year resistance plan, well, that's to deal with the fire safety issue and also the enhancement of electrical safety of hawker areas. So after the improvement scheme or the facelifting, we also try to rationalize the overall layout of hawker areas. Well, in fact, there is also natural wastage, and we have already tried our level best to take that out for application again, so long as fire safety and electrical safety can be ensured. So we are now consulting the district councils. We have already consulted 3, and 4 more will be coming up. So if the district councils or the trade can voice their concerns to see how the number can be increased, we'll be prepared to look into it. On the 4 categories, I'm sure you all understand that. And as the Undersecretary has already made it clear, for the 390 licensed newspaper hawkers and also for itinerant hawkers, 310, well, it's not that we're not going to give them any chance. In fact, it's up to them to decide. And if they want, they can join the application, or they can join the balloting. And then for general public, we have explained that there is also some demand in the community. Well, from March to April 2018, we contacted some of those who had been consulted in the 2009 and 2010. Well, for the 750 members of the public, we contacted them, and they also responded, and some 3,600 responded, and 70% said that they would be interested. 咁所以咧，其實
So we only approached those who joined the last balloting allocation exercise, and there are some of them out there we cannot approach. So, and as for registered assistants, they need at least 5 years or more experience. They can also take part in the allocation exercise. The registration system is not a recognition of their status. Rather, this is just to ensure that assistants can help licensees to operate without fear of being prosecuted. We know that there is some demand from assistants, so 25% of the stores are reserved for registered assistants with 5 years or more experience. This is we have already struck a balance, and of course we heard your views, and we will consider them very carefully. As regards the validity period of 5 years, you have to understand that there should be a normal turnover in the trade to have new entrants so that the trade will be more vibrant. For people interested, there is a mechanism for them to join the trade. Of course, we've heard the comments of deputations. Some asked whether the validity period can be longer, such as up to 10 years. After the consultation, we will consider this point. As for whether we have consulted the community sufficiently, before the paper was introduced to the council, we have had communication with stakeholders in the trade. And since the last meeting with the panel, we have started to consult the 7 district councils concerned. And today we also have a public hearing to receive views from the public. We will analyze views received from different sources, because our views are diverse, and we have to strike a balance. And on the point of inheritance, Madam Wong, you have to be succinct, because you have to leave time for members. All right, for inheritance, succession, and EGP and markets and itinerant talk as well. I think I can leave them to to a supplementary paper if members so wish. All right. 7 members would like to ask questions. 4 minutes each. Claudia Mo, Anne Zhang, Ho Kai Ming, Mr. Vincent Chang, and Eunice Chen Haiyan. Thank you. Ms. Chang. Thank you, Chairman. There are 400 odd vacant pitches for allocation. Some of them are in Temple Street. If one quarter of them will be for newspaper hawkers, how can they survive in Temple Street? Or can they engage in a trade depending on the business situation of Temple Street? Thank you. There are vacant pictures, they can sell type 2 and type 3 commodities, mainly dry goods. Now, there are 4 categories of applicants. We use random balloting. So there will be 100 pictures for each category. And when an applicant submits an application, he can indicate his choice of district. All right, when the 400 stores are categorized, then they can choose which store, which type, or which area he prefers. All right, from the newspaper hawker, Mr. Liu, I represent the views of newspaper hawkers. Madam Zhang, now if we are allocated a pitch in Temple Street, we can sell things other than newspapers. Well, in Temple Street, we can sell both a newspaper and other special commodities allowed under the license. Now, for newspaper hawkers, we can sell 12 commodities in addition to newspapers and magazines, but some traders may continue to sell newspapers plus a few more commodities. I know a few newspaper hawkers in Central. Now their business is very poor. Nobody reads magazine or printed newspapers anymore. I always patronize them when I see them. Now they're allowed to operate at that location, and they need to hawk in order to make a living. So can they be allowed to sell more different types of commodities? They're allowed to sell tissue packs and candies, but can you allow a richer diversity of commodities? Now, among the 400 odd pictures, 200 of them are in Kowloon West, in Mong Kong, Yau Chim Mong, and Kowloon City. You should respect the proposals from existing hawkers. Well, as Mr. Liu said, if a newspaper hawker can apply for a fixed pitch. And Madam Zhang's question is, what happens if a newspaper hawker chooses to remain at its own location? Now, printed newspapers are not that popular now, and there are also free newspapers being handed out, and newspaper hawkers have operational difficulties. We have to strike a balance. Although they have aspirations, there are complaints as well. There are views that their operation should not cause obstruction, and they should also minimize their nuisance. The communication will continue. And of course, we will respect the views of the local community. We are consulting district councils, and applicants can also indicate their preferred location. And then after they are accorded priorities, then they can choose according to their wish, provided that such pictures are available. Deputy Chairman, thank you. Thank you. I want to thank the deputations for being here today. So there is proposed relocation for 4 categories. For itinerant hawkers, very few itinerant hawkers are here today telling us that they want to be allocated fixed pitches. If I were an itinerant hawker, of course I would want to continue to be one. So I don't know whether the 1/4 allocated to this category will be taken up. And Mr. Li Taixing, the concern group for the low-income earners, but he is absent today. Now, if he is really that concerned, he should have been present today. Perhaps his concern is limited. All right. Now, for newspaper hawkers, I think their views are polarized. We have Cheng and Fu representing 2 different types of views. Some say that it's pointless for newspaper hawkers to operate in a fixed pitch, and some would welcome the move. I think there is a suggestion to relax the rule for commodities they can sell so that they can sell more than 12 types. When Sophia Chen was the undersecretary, I was saying the same to her. She talked about relaxing the type of commodities they can sell. Is more than 2 years, but it's just the same. And of course, it is not the current undersecretary's responsibility. Now, for the fixed pitches, many of them are being operated by assistants. They have helped the licensees for many years. They are always there. There are more than 2,000 active assistants, and they are familiar with the trade, and they are really very active. Now, you have divided the applicants into 4 categories, and you have not given any special treatment for people who really know the trade. The Hawker Association for Hong Kong Kowloon and Anti have said to me many times that they would want all the fixed pitches allocated to assistants. All right, I hope that a greater proportion of pitches can be reserved for the registered assistants. As regards the operational period of 5 years, what will happen to successful applicants 5 years down the road? Will they become unemployed, or can they have their licenses renewed? First, itinerant hawkers and newspaper hawkers, they can take up the fixed pitches according to their wish. It is not a mandatory measure. Many itinerant hawkers are rather old. Oh, so sorry. Although I am on friendly terms with you, please come back to my question. Well, there was the mechanism for surrender of itinerant licenses, and then it expired in 2010. Some itinerant hawkers would want to operate at fixed pitches. I will not repeat the comments on newspaper hawkers. I hope you understand that in addition to or apart from assistance, there is also a great demand for fixed pitches from the general public and other categories of applicants. And when we consulted the district council and also the stakeholders, the views are diverse, and there are demands from different categories. All right, my question is about what will happen to the successful applicants after 5 years. And you look at the seating plan, those who are here are most concerned about this subject, and most of them are fixed-pitched hawkers. All right. Well, what will happen 5 years down the road? Is it still my time? Yes, please.
Sorry, speaker's not coming through. What I'd like to say is that for this public hearing, there are many hawkers who may not be fixed pitch hawkers. They've been there, but then for the pro-establishment members, they all went to support the government and they didn't turn up. So I think it's about to what extent you're giving importance to this meeting. All right, on the question about the 5-year validity. Okay, first on new licenses. Okay, for new licensees, the validity will be for 5 years, but then for newspaper vendors, initially, well, they would still hold on to their license, and if they switch over to the new license, and of course, they will still be able to continue. So only for new licensees, the validity would be for 5 years, but then for newspaper vendors, they've already got this license without any expiry date, and therefore they will be allowed to continue with their business after 5 years. Next, Claudia Mo. My apologies, Chairman. We have the environment panel meeting next door. So on the 5-year validity period, you don't need to be someone from the trade. Well, just for any one of us can tell, all right, 5 years would be too short. All right, if 10 years is too long, then how about 8 years? Well, the Undersecretary just said that you're still all ears to comments and suggestions and so on. But then listening on, apparently 5 years has been fixed. So basically, it's not going to be changed. And then they spent a lot of time to read out the paper again, and they just went back on history and told us how it all came about. But then, is that true? Have I got it wrong? That is, the 5-year is fixed, and also for those register assistants, they had to compete for the pictures amongst themselves. So, can there be any improvement? Okay, I missed out about 10 minutes, so I don't know whether or not this was touched on. And the third point that I'd like to know is, well, that's my impression, and I've also heard from the deputations. So several years back, I already told the residents, in particular in Kowloon West, we have Abliu Street, Poling Street, and also Fuk Yuen Street, and so on. All right, when you heard it, you had the idea of having bazaars and so on, but then the administration is trying to dry them out. So do you admit that that's indeed your intention? So 3 questions, please. Who is going to answer? Ms. Wong? I don't agree that we're trying to dry them out. Okay, you do not admit to that. That's the reason why we have put out the pictures for bidding again. And as I said in the paper, for the operation period, so we gave that as an example. That's for 5 years. So we just said that is an example, that it could be for 5 years, and we are still all ears to their comments. And as I said, we'd be listening to all their comments before a decision is taken. And for the views that have been expressed, there have been some different opinions. Some would suggest it longer, others shorter. And also, after the license expires, what about their track record? So have they breached any rules and so on? So after listening to their views, we'll go back and think about it and decide on the way forward. Thank you. 2 more questions. Can you answer those questions too? 2 more questions. Anything else? I think I've answered all the questions. How can you claim that you've answered all the questions? What about drying them out? Other than that, what have you said? What about the 5-year period? So have you clarified that you'd be thinking about that? All right, you thought that you'd already clarified this. What about the chance of the register assistants getting a license? You should admit that you've not answered that question, right? We've already spoken in detail. In fact, for the register assistants, well, for those with more than 5 years experience, we have about 2,590 of them with more than 5 years experience, and we have also heard from them that they should be given a higher chance so that they can continue for more than 5 years. And if we were to increase that chance, in fact, the number of pitches will be fixed. So after listening to their views, we'll go back and think about it. But then please do understand that we also have to take note of the limited supply and demand. So Chairman, in all fairness, do you think that she has answered my question already? All right, she has said something, but whether or not she has answered your question is everybody's guess. Okay, next, Mr. Chang Wing-shun. First of all, I'd like to welcome all the deputations and those who are concerned about fixed pitch hawkers and so on. I thank you all for your contribution to the trade, and I do have a close tie with that because of the Far Yuen Street fire. Many pitches had to be relocated because they'd like to improve fire safety, and many hawkers had also put in a lot of efforts because it's not been easy for them to get hold of a pitch, and they all worked very hard to improve the situation. I've also participated in more than 10-20 meetings. I understand that everybody was trying very hard to improve the situation. And for the earlier scheme, I think there was an advantage. First, they would be able to surrender the license and get an ex gratia allowance, and they will also be given a subsidy to refurbish their pitch. In fact, after the refurbishment, that would also be good to their pitch. For example, the store would look better, and it's safer. And now, when this scheme is rolled out again, you're talking about how the pitches would be reallocated. And as far as I'm concerned, I think we do not have medium to long-term planning. How can we ensure that these pitches would be more viable? For example, in Sham Shui Po, the tourism board has also been promoting local community economy. So pitches would be one of them. And therefore, I hope that the administration can bring this back and consider it. It's not just about the reallocation. You will have to give them more support because they are facing a lot of competition from the supermarkets and so on, and they are subjected to a lot of pressure. So they are actually living from hand to mouth, and if they suspend their business, then they will no longer be able to make a living. So you will have to help them in doing more publicity, for example. So can you tell us exactly what you're going to do? And also, you will also have to think about the relationship between the assistants and also the licensee. With this reallocation exercise, it's not fair to many of the assistants because they've been involved in the business for a long time, and they know the business, they know the pitch, and if they are not given a license, it's not good. And you've also clarified that the hawkers and also the assistants will be able to do a better job with this new scheme. So can you tell us exactly what you're going to do? Who is to answer the question? Well, let me respond to Mr. Chang. I'd like to thank him for his comments. In fact, I am fully aware of the fact that over the past few years, many stakeholders have put in a lot of efforts, and we have come that far. And I'm sure the business environment would also be improved with the facelifting. And also different bureaus will also have different roles. For example, I understand that in Sham Shui Po, they try to revitalize different areas so that there would be different characteristics. In fact, we can work together to do it, and I'm sure we can work with other bureaus to come up with something. Well, Chairman, I'd like to know this. I hope that you can bring it back to come up with new initiatives. And second, well, Mr. Cheng also said that all right, you should also roll out the assistance scheme on a regular basis so that there can be new commerce, and the ex gratia payments should also be offered. Well, the scheme itself originated from the need to improve fire safety and also electrical safety. So for those in need, we have already completed that for most of the hawker areas. As to whether or not there is room for the extension of the scheme to other areas, yes, we will consider it. But then for the hawkers licenses, well, some of the licensees might be very old already, and therefore there is also some natural wastage, so that there would be vacant pitches that could be made available. So we'll see whether or not we can make better use of the land resources made available through such channels. Yes, that would also increase the turnover because there are new things that could be sold. So you should allow for some new players. Or if you have to wait till they wait for the natural waste stage, you will have to allow them to decide when they're going to retire. So you will have to come up with new ideas. Okay. Next, Ms. Chen Hoyen. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank the hawkers representatives for coming to the meeting. Well, it's been hard on you. And also the Bureau also said that the reason why we have these peaches, that's because of the 2011 fire. And earlier on, I also went to your hawker areas. For example, there are different hawker areas in Fa Yuen Street and also Up Liu Street. I think the current situation has improved. They have electricity meters and so on. I think there has been some misunderstanding, and Ms. Wong also answered some of them. So can you elaborate a bit on that? Because looking at the paper, Mr. Chen Kam-wing, Mr. Shuk Ying, I've heard you all, and also Lee Man Kit and Chen Tak Long, they all talk about the same point. They talk about the 5-year validity period, but then looking at your paper again, you said that given the fact that you would have to look at the license, which will spell out the licensing period, for example, it would be for 5 years. So can you allay their concerns? Because many of them would be considering whether or not they would be investing in their pitch, or is it worth their while? Is it worthy of their while to invest further in the pitch if it's just for 5 years, as the official just said? It's just by way of an example. It may not be for 5 years because 80% of the representatives are concerned about this. So can you clarify that? And also on the assistance issue, because as said, there are some 2,000 of them, and if it's divided by 4 categories, then they will stand only 25% of the chance to get a pitch. So is that to be evenly distributed, or would there be a higher chance for the registered assistants to get a license, and also for the newspaper vendors? Indeed, many of the newspapers have gone digital. So newspaper vendors do not have a lot of room to maneuver. But then you would just be confining them to 12 categories of items, and the reason for not increasing the variety, that's because you don't want to see fierce or adverse competition with the other vendors. So can it go the other way around for the convenience stores? Why do you not disallow them from selling newspapers? They can sell all other items but not newspapers. Why can it not be done that way? Okay, 3 questions. Okay, let's take a look into this. First, on the 5-year validity. As we explained earlier, the reason why we have this 5-year period. In fact, there are also voices saying that there should be natural waste stage, and we also want to have new entrants. And if we want to see sustainability in the business, there should also be mechanisms to enable those who are interested in joining the trade to join. And that being the case, in the paper, we have set out 5 years as an example. And as I just said, in the process, different people have different views, and therefore we will have to listen to all the views before deciding on the validity period. Does that mean that there is still room for maneuver? Not necessarily 5 years. Well, of course, there needs to be a starting point. There needs to be a premise for discussion. And after listening to those views, and we will also be taking on board their justifications, and if they have sound arguments, then of course we'll be prepared to listen. And also on newspaper vendors, as I explained, the communication is going on. And of course, mention was made about competition. But then for the commodities that they sell, if they're obstructing the passageway, because they are often located in passageways, and if they cause any obstruction, then of course that's something that we have to deal with. We also have to bear in mind what types of goods they are selling. What's the third one? RA's ratio. Well, for RA's ratio, as we said, there will be 4 categories, and of course RAs would be taking up some 25%, and we are still in the process of listening to views, and of course there are some suggestions that for newspaper hawkers and also itinerant hawkers, they might not be very interested, and if they are not able to take up all the 100 places, then what's going to happen? So we will have to go back and think about it. So the consultation process is one that we'll look at their comments and we will listen to their arguments, and then before we take the final decision, it's a process of listening to the arguments and also analyzing the arguments.
好啊。
Speaker is off mic. Now, if the validity period is 5 years, does that mean that I have to dispose of all my commodities after 5 years? Because we'll have to buy them with our savings and investment. There is no guarantee that all our commodities can be completely sold within 5 years. Dr. Priscilla Leung, thank you, deputations, for expressing your views to us. They are very valuable. My constituency is in Kowloon West, and when after the fire in Fa Yuen Street, I went to the area many times, and I'm grateful to the accommodation by the hawkers, so that we have now a wider EVA. But that was at the cost of lives and properties. Now, Hong Kong people are very tolerant. We have some fixed pitch hawkers having to move. It was in the end of a year when I saw the fabric stores moved, or the area cleared. And Ap Lei Chow is also, Avenue Street is also a very special street, and there is also Fuk Wing Street and Po Ring Street. I think hawker areas are part of Hong Kong's characteristics, and they're always a place for us to. They always have a feel of nostalgia for us. In the long term, we should adopt a policy of helping them to conserve and develop. All right, the area in Sam Shui Po for selling cloths has been cleared. And some young people nowadays don't want to be employees. They want to start their own business. And we're not talking about big enterprises. Sometimes when I visit Taiwan, I go to their special arts village. And South Korea has also done very well in this regard. In Hong Kong, can we help young people to add value to their products? They should not be driven away after 5 years. Yes, their views are divergent, but I think as a matter of policy, we should give them assistance. For a modern city like Hong Kong, hawker areas are a local characteristic. Now, it's also about management. Will you take reference from other countries? They have rather modern hawker areas. And can we have a streaming arrangement? We have too many low-cost tours, and these people do not have a high consumption power. They are interested to come to Hong Kong. As a matter of policy, we should help them. And of course, our legislation and policy should help the existing operators first. then I think it is good to help the assistants. We should think of the viability and survival of the industry in the long term. Thank you. I just received a message, a WhatsApp message from Mr. Lee, who is from the Alliance for Concern of the Grassroots. His father has just passed away. He was here at the last meeting, but today, although he really wants to come, but then his parent has just passed away. He was here last time, so we didn't have a quorum. So we would like to express our apologies as well as condolences to Mr. Lee and his family. All right, I have a few short questions and answers. I expect short answers from the administration. So your 854 licenses was surrendered, and now you're only going to reallocate 423. Can you identify space in these areas to totally reallocate 854 so that you are not really trying to stifle the industry? And the undersecretary and the assistant director claimed that they would continue to hear views on the proposal of a 5-year validity period. I think this is unrealistic and unfair to the licensees because they will have to invest a lot of money in buying the commodities. You can set up a demerit point system if the performance is undesirable. Then if you can have a reasonable mechanism to revoke or not to renew a license after the 5-year has expired. And then a question on the process. The administration talks about reconsultation. So I'd like to know when, after consulting the district councils and this council, when will they start the reallocation? We want to ask the administration to come back and report to us its outcome of consultation. We can then put it on our agenda. And if need be, we can ask the public to come and tell us their views once again. There are 390 newspaper hawkers. They have contributed to Hong Kong for a long time. You can identify another 400 hawkers, then you'll be able to take care of all the newspaper hawkers who would like to change to another trade. For those who don't, we respect their wish. Undersecretary, first on the number of licenses, that is to identify suitable locations. All right, your question was on the numbers. Now, we have enhancement proposals. After the fire and the assistance scheme, we really do not have enough space to accommodate so many pitches. We need to widen the EVA, and so we are able to put up 423 licenses for reallocation, and we have exhausted all means, and 423 is the biggest number we can provide. There is no room for this to be further increased. So please focus on how we can properly allocate the 400 odd pitches we have now. And 500, the validity period of 5 years is just an example. We just want to build in flexibility here. As regards the actual number of years, we can rediscuss it within the administration. And we have to confirm the validity period before we can have the other details. All right, after this consultation, you have to come to a decision. I'd like to know when you can come back and give us a report of your decision. Yes, members would like us to do it ASAP. Well, in the first quarter, we will have completed consultation of all 7 district councils. Our intention is to start accepting applications in the third quarter of 2019. And in between the first and third quarters, there is still time. And then we'll be able to report back to the council either in writing or in other ways. So I'm afraid you have to tell us in the second quarter. Yes, before the summer recess. All right, if we have time for sure, we will follow up. Second round of questions. Deputy Chairman, 3 minutes, please. Thank you. As regards Mr. Li Tai-shing, now I understand that the reason for his absence is because of a family affair. So I'd like to send him my deepest condolences. Now, for other licenses, the validity period is not 5 years. How come you're proposing 5 for this round? Now, 5 years pose challenges to the licensees, and they're uncertain about their future. So is there anything you can respond to in this regard? Why should we introduce operational period? The idea is to encourage turnover and to increase vibrancy by allowing new hawkers to join the trade. Some members said that maybe 5 years is too short. Can it be 10 years? There are different views, and for instance, there is a suggestion that the period can be extended if the licensee has been very cooperative and compliant with the rules and regulations. But for other licenses, there is no license operation validity period, right? For itinerant and newspaper hawkers, currently there is none. We will not impose validity period to that, but we'll talk about new licenses. That's exactly the problem. For those, the existing hawkers have an unlimited period. How come for newly allocated licenses you are going to impose a validity period? This is unreasonable. And what about the newspaper hawkers? We have met with you a number of times, even when Sylvia Chen was the Undersecretary. She promised to consider that. What is the latest position, Undersecretary? Thank you, Mr. Shiu, for your suggestion. I just heard your suggestion, and we will discuss with the department again. No undertaking can be given now, but I understand that there is such an aspiration. I put it to you at least twice, but I think the officials back then are not here now. Where have they gone? So it's been 2 years since our last meeting, and I don't think this is a reasonable way of doing things. Ms. Chan Ho-Yen, thank you. So the department said that 5 years is just an example. I hope that after they have heard this, they will reconsider the proposal, because that would affect the investment decision. As regards the licensing fee, the range will be 4,347 to 6,715, depending on the size of the pitch. We all want the fees to be downwardly adjusted. We understand that hawkers there to do business, but it all depends on the economy. Well, the budget will be announced very soon, and the economic forecast is such that we are going to face tremendous economic difficulties, and the prices of the commodities here are low, and the income are not making a lot of money. So in the coming year, can you waive the license fee, or can there be a further downward adjustment of the fees?
Yes. Well, the license fee is charged on the basis of cost recovery, so it's already far lower than that for markets and so on. And in fact, if you look at the actual license fee, is quite low. And in the past years, very often there would be relief for hawkers by way of exemption or fee waiver. So we'll pass your comments on to the relevant bureau. In fact, with regard to the $4,000 under the community care scheme, well, I think the nature is similar. So can you also pass it on to the Financial Secretary about the challenges that they might face where there is a downturn in the economy? Yes, and Chiang? Chairman, can I ask this again? Okay, for the surplus 400 plus licenses, they'll be up for bidding by the 4 categories of persons. All right, for some applicants, I don't think everybody will be rushing to apply for a license. So if there is any surplus in any of these categories, what are you going to do about them? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Xiang, for your questions. Well, let me say a bit more about the 423 pitches and how they're going to be distributed for the 4 categories of applicants. If you divide the number, so you're talking about 105, 105, and 108, and then for the last category, for the general public, the remaining one will be for them. So we'll be having these 4 categories for these 4 types of applicants. So they'll each apply under their own category. So the number of applicants, if there are more than 105 applicants for that particular category, so for the number 106, he'll be placed on the waiting list, and then for every queue, if it's in excess of 105 applicants or applications, so we'll draw the line at 105. So at so there'll be 423 applicants, and then they'll be chosen on a random basis, and then they'll be given a ranking, and then they'll be able to choose the pitches in accordance to the serial number that they've been assigned. So let's say all the 423 applicants have already chosen their pitches, and after the first round, if there are some pitches that are not wanted by any of the applicants, so the applicants on the waiting list will be able to have a chance to select those pitches. Okay, so the quota would be 105. Okay, the second scenario would be that for the first and second queues, in other words, for the existing licensees, let's say there are fewer than 105. Let's say there are only 30 who would like to get the pitches. Okay, there will be a surplus, and as the Deputy Director just said, for the surplus pitches, theoretically, they'll all be up for the applicants on the waiting list to bid. As to how they're going to be dealt with, we'll have to go back and think about it. And after listening to your views, and thanks to the deputations who have given us their views, we'll be considering them very carefully. What I'd like to say is, sorry, time's out. Please continue. Well, I've heard the views are from the deputations, in particular those from the trade. They have different voices, and those who are not from the trade, they've also given us a lot of precious comments. So for all the views, including those from the deputations and those from members, we will take them into account and see how we can improve on the system. So we'll get back after careful consideration. Well, can I say this? What we are most concerned about is in any one of those categories. Let's say if there are surplus pitches that have not been bidded for, and Chia made it clear that okay, so for the 400 plus or 800 plus, they should be made available for those on the waiting list. That's the best way. But then as to which method should be adopted to make sure that it's fair, that's for consideration. So whether or not they will be put up for those in category 3 or 4 to bid for. All right, I've received this motion that has been tabled by N. Chiang and Chen Wengshen. We do not have a quorum, so let's ring the bell to call for a quorum. So let's ring the quorum bell, and while we have some time, the five deputations can be allowed to speak. Okay, raise your hands if you'd like to speak. Okay, my apologies because we do have some time constraint. So 1 minute each. Lau Ka Xin, Miss Lau Ka Xin, Madam Lau Ka Xin, Lee Min Kit, Liang Mingyu, Zhong Choi Wan, Lau Chok Fu, Chen Kam Wing, and Yang Man Kam. 1 minute each. Thank you. Lau Ka Xin. Thank you, Chairman. Well, you've wasted several hours of my time listening to the administration's so-called review and policy on hawkers and so on. In summary, I think what they've been doing is like what the Link REIT has been doing. So they are exploiting us. Well, we are trying to become self-reliant. We are actually earning sweat money. So they are looking down upon us. So they are thinking that they are actually giving us sympathy, and they are pitying us. In fact, for the 800 plus licenses, you've been drawing us out. You've been exploiting us. You've been depriving us of our benefits. So you just try to recover our licenses, and then it's like you're doing a big favor to us. So you're not actually offering all the 800 plus licenses. You're actually offering us only 400 plus. I think the outcome is ridiculous. Next, Lee Man Kit, 1 minute, please. Thank you, Chairman. All right. After listening to the speakers, I've also drawn my own conclusion. That is for the new licenses. Does it have to be renewed? Because after 5 years, well, as many people have said, if I were to switch to any other trade, if I were to make a living out of other business, would it work? So there should be a demerit point system, so that if there are people who have broken the rules for a number of times, then their licenses should be cancelled, and then their license should be made available for others to bid for. And also for hawkers licenses, for itinerant hawkers, should they be given a license, they should have more choices. And for newspaper vendors, should they go into the fixed pitch hawker areas? So can they have more choices in terms of the commodities that they sell? I think they've heard you. Okay. Mr. Liang Mingyu. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'd like to clarify an observation, because for fixed pitch hawkers, it's not a poverty alleviation policy. Please do not mistake it with the bazaar policy. Well, to give you an example, let's say given the government's cost to come up with a fixed pitch is already $40,000, together with the commodities that you have to procure, that will cost you up to $100,000. So it's really not a poverty alleviation policy. Many people do not understand how the trade works. That's why. And also, is it that other than the 423, there are no further vacancies? In fact, when they ask us to move out, they offer us a lot of pitches. In fact, that has nothing to do with fire safety and so on. That's the reason why they have offered those pitches to us. And I've noticed that after the re-layout, those pitches have not been made available for bidding. So I hope that the administration will work harder so that more pitches can be made available. Those are the 2 points that I'd like to make. Okay, we have now got a quorum in the conference room, so we'll be able to deal with the ad hoc motion. So Ms. Chiang, can you read that out to us? Thank you, Chairman. This panel suggests that for the 423 reallocated pitches, in the process of application, if there are surplus quotas, priority should be given to the register assistants to apply, and there should also be a regular exercise of rolling out the hawker assistance scheme. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. No objections, so motion is carried. So the motion is carried. So we'll give time to the deputations. Next, Ms. Chung Choi-Wan. Thank you, Chairman. Well, the administration has often said that, okay, they'd like to develop the economy, they'd like to develop the 6 major pillar industries, but then for those of us workers, in fact, it's been more than 10 years and yet we have not been able to get a license. So please consider those of us from the grassroots, we are just doing some handicraft. This is also a cultural and local community economy with some characteristics. And if you offer us a fixed pitch license, I'd rather that I don't get it because I'd like to go to different districts. I want everybody to be happy. I don't want to stay in Mongkok per se. So I'd like to make sure that all 7 million people in Hong Kong would be able to see our handicraft so that I'll be able to share my happiness with all the visitors and tourists. So please do consider this. This is a traditional handicraft, so please do allow us to survive. Thank you. Next, Mr. Lam. Well, for the newspaper vendors, they've been working for several decades in serving the local community. The residents would like to patronize them. And yet, other than newspapers and magazines, we are only allowed to sell some outdated commodities like batteries and so on. All right, you say that you would allow us to be reallocated elsewhere, and it's us who are not willing to move. I find it heartbreaking. I hope that the administration will take care of us newspaper vendors. Next, Young Man Kang. Well, some claim that newspaper hawkers are obstructing the traffic. That's why we are not allowed to sell commodities. In fact, what we've been selling, in fact, it's just a handful of them. Well, for all the magazines, we just place them out because there are some holes or there are some empty spaces that are not filled. So we've been asked to place out all the magazines in order to sell them. So how can we be blamed for obstructing the traffic? You should not be tarring everybody with the same brush. So you shouldn't say that so long as there is one store breaking the rules, everybody else would be tainted. Next, thank you, Chairman. If you have a policy to support the newspaper vendors, then they can be allowed to sell SIM cards and so on. So they don't have to go into the wet markets to sell vegetables and so on. They don't know the environment. In fact, you're forcing them to die. Well, several years ago, you also asked us to draw lots for some licenses. In fact, for those who are bidding for the license, they are not the register assistants. In fact, those who are able to survive would be the register assistants. In fact, you're reluctant in doing so. If you are not willing to do it, then you should issue more register assistance permits instead of just forcing them to go into the market. In fact, for those selling chestnuts and also sweet potatoes, all right, I'd like to patronize them, and yet I can no longer find him, and we will also not be able to get used to that. I don't think that's a good way. Next, Fan Pui Ying. Thank you, Chairman. I think I have this impression, Chairman, we have different hawker licensees, and we also have members of the public. In fact, apparently for these 300 plus licenses, different people are bidding for them. In fact, I hope that all of us, including the department, you should understand that there is a short supply of that. That's the reason why we are talking about who should be given the priority. Should it be the assistants? Should it be the members of the public? So we should look at the number that is required. So we should not be pitching one against another. We should make a bigger pie. And also on the bazaars and so on, we do not have any platform to voice our views. I'm sure, well, many of the public would not be bidding for this. Taking Tin Sao Bazaar as an example, in fact, they're running as fixed pitch stores. Sorry. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The time is up for this meeting. I'm sorry I cannot allow all deputations to speak. I've tried to use up all of the time available. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.